All right, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Joyce Bock. I am the Vice President of the Australian Institute of Parapsychological Research. Yeah, so this is a non-profit organisation, abbreviated to AIPR. It's been around since 1970s, and I want to really thank you all for joining us today. Well, I might start introducing our first speaker. Yes, hello, good morning. Or no, good
Well,
night. Yeah, midnight for you.
the cameras. I should really have done this talk on time slips, perhaps, because I'm speaking to you from the past.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Yes.
It haven't happened yet
Yeah.
in Australia.
So Steve was referred to by the Wall Street Journal as being the gold standard in ghost hunting. Steve has begun his research for answers as a child and has spent more than 50 years investigating and researching ghosts, poltergeists, houses, and similar related phenomena. He is currently acknowledged by many of his peers and academic parapsychologists to be one of the leading investigators in the UK. And he will be talking to us about infrasound and the paranormal. So welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us at this very
Thank you for
late
having
hour.
me.
Um,
It's not too late, not for a ghost hunter. We work
oh,
nights, remember?
okay.
Okay, without further ado, because it's quite a lengthy and it does get at times, be warned, a little technical talk. Boom or busted. Should paranormal research be interested in infrasound? So first of all, let's deal with what infrasound is. And this is where the technical stuff doesn't work very well. There you go. Infrasound is generally defined as being sound that has a frequency below that of normal human hearing. So the opposite of a dog whistle, kind of. This is typically considered to be below 20 hertz. Psychologist and parapsychologist Dr. James Jim Horan described it in more simplistic terms as not until as a hum you can't hear. This is the physicist in me now saying not untypically for a psychologist. Horan got it wrong, as it's perfectly possible to hear sounds that have a lower frequency depending upon the level of acoustic energy that is present. And this quick graph of human hearing chart. In other words, what I'm saying is, in order to hear very low frequency sounds, the sounds have to be really, really loud. But most people's eardrums will have given way long before they can hear true infrasound, the sounds that are below 20 hertz. Now, early paranormal investigators were aware that vibrations might play I'm talking about physical vibrations, not psychical vibrations, may play a significant role in the production of some reported paranormal experiences. In the 19th century, at the Bee House investigation, which involved several founders of the Society for Psychical Research, it was suggested that a seismometer might be usefully employed as part of the investigation. Indeed, reading through the details from that particular case, there is a great deal to suggest that infrasound may have been a candidate for several of the reported experiences. And in the 1930s, the doyen of ghost hunters, Harry Price, made use of a bowl of mercury in his ghost hunting kit in order to detect for the presence of low frequency vibrations. In 1961, SPR members Tony Cornell and Alan Gould carried out a series of interesting experiments using a condemned public housing property in Cambridge, England. They used a device that sent powerful vibrations through the building in order to test a theory that minor earth tremors and geophysical disturbances might be responsible for some of the physical effects, such as the movement of objects reported in poltergeist cases. Although they were not testing an infrasound hypothesis, their equipment would have been producing significant quantities of low frequency sound energy. Unfortunately, the records of the Earth-moving experiment does not make any mention of psychological or physiological effects being observed or experienced by the experimenters. In 1974, the Canadian neurologist Dr. Michael Persinger suggested that there may be a direct causal link between infrasound and reports of anomalous experiences. Specifically, Persinger was suggested that vague feelings of foreboding and apprehension reported by some individuals prior to earthquakes may be linked to the low frequency sound. He drew upon in existing infrasound research primarily conducted by the military and NASA, which had demonstrated that powerful levels of infrasound were capable of inducing a range of disturbing and unsettling experiences that affected several of the test subjects. These experiences included feelings of fear, apprehension, depression, nausea, and dizziness. And as a result, Persinger suggested that weak infrasonic oscillations from ambient sources may not be sufficient to elicit full-blown symptoms, but could evoke responses of a less severe nature. This idea that infrasound might be responsible for creating experiences that some may then interpret as being paranormal was revived in the late 1990s by British engineer Vic Tandy, following a series of experiences in an engineering workshop that had gained a reputation for being haunted. Staff members, including Tandy, had had a series of anomalous experiences that included a sense of fear, depression, and the appearance of vague apparitions. Tandy was a keen fencer, and one morning he arrived early at the workshop in order to prepare his fencing blade for a forthcoming competition. Upon placing the blade into the vise, he noticed that the free end of the metal blade was vibrating frantically up and down. Recalling his recent experiences, he realized that the blade was vibrating. Therefore, it must be receiving energy in the form of acoustic energy. There was a lot of background noise, but Tandy realized that sounds can be infrasonic and therefore effectively inaudible. He decided to experiment, and placing the blade on the floor, held in a movable vise, he moved it around the workshop. He observed that the blade vibrated strongly when in the center of the room and ceased vibrating towards the ends of the room. And he realized that they were sharing the workshop with a strong acoustic standing wave. In 1998, together with Dr. Tony Lawrence, he produced what has become a landmark paper entitled The Ghost in the Machine, in which they documented some of the experiences of staff members and the discovery of the standing wave within the workshop. As an engineer, Tandy realized that low-frequency vibrations could cause the rapier blade to vibrate, and that any sounds produced by the low-frequency vibration would be inaudible. Using the known length of the workshop, he calculated the frequency of the standing wave as being close to 19 hertz, which was infrasonic and therefore inaudible. The cause of the apparent infrasound was quickly traced to a newly installed extractor fan that had been placed in the workshop. Tandy also drew upon previous research in which test subjects exposed to high levels of infrasound had reported effects that seemed remarkably similar to his own experiences and those of his colleagues, and in particular, a NASA report that cited a frequency of 19 hertz, which caused the eyeball to oscillate and the vision field to smear. As a result of these discoveries, Tandy and Lawrence made the suggestion that inaudible infrasound at or close to 19 hertz was causing the unwelcome sensations of anxiety and sense of presence, and significantly that the effects of the infrasound on the eyeball was responsible for the appearance of apparitions in the peripheral vision field, which he himself had experienced. The following year, the pair made field measurements of infrasound within a 14th century cellar in Coventry. The cellar had been the site of numerous reports of paranormal experiences. Tandy was surprised to discover that the previously noted frequency of 19 hertz was present at higher than expected levels. This apparently confirmed his earlier hypothesis and led to a second paper, Something in the Cellar, being produced in 2000. Prior to its closure in 2007, I was fortunate enough to visit the location and also make a series of infrasound measurements using the same positions within the cellar that Tandy had himself used. On that occasion, no infrasound peak at close to 19 hertz was observed. Sadly, Tandy died suddenly before he could conduct any further work on his infrasound hypothesis. But Tandy's hypothesis lit a fuse that quickly exploded within the paranormal research community and parapsychology. It was readily accepted as being the cause for many subjective paranormal experiences, ghostly sightings, and haunted locations. For instance, Google has more than 100,000 page links to Tandy's work, with much of it repeating the original idea that infrasound, and in particular infrasound with a frequency of close to 19 hertz, is responsible for many paranormal experiences. The hypothesis has been repeated and reported in several mainstream science journals, blogs, and media, as well as in countless hundreds of internet sites dedicated to the paranormal. It has been described in books and reported in newspapers. Investigators and leading parapsychologists from around the globe have been brought in to demonstrate and to explain the paranormal effects of infrasound on various television shows. Most of the time, they were merely content with measuring the infrasound levels. At other times, they set up infrasound generating equipment in order to produce the necessary 19 hertz. There has even been a movie dedicated to this idea, entitled 19 Hertz, The Frequency of Fear. This idea that infrasound at around 19 hertz has had in a short time become the de facto explanation for many types of paranormal experience, and was used and touted by paranormal investigators and parapsychologists alike. So, should we just accept this explanation? Can infrasound at a frequency of close to 19 hertz adequately explain so many paranormal experiences? Let's re-examine Tandy and Lawrence's original paper. Based upon the length of the workshop, which we know to be 30 foot, Tandy calculated the frequency of the standing wave. Using the formula that's on screen, Tandy calculated the lowest fundamental resonant frequency of the workshops, which in this case was 18.98 hertz. Tandy recognized and made clear that his calculations were subject to some degree of inaccuracy, suggesting a margin of error of plus or minus around 10%. In making his original calculations, Tandy took no account of either the height or the width of the workshop, presumably because he recognized and understood that the fundamental frequencies of these shorter dimensions would be higher in frequency and therefore likely audible. However, in order to properly determine the acoustic properties of any space, and therefore accurately calculate the frequency of any acoustic standing waves within that space, calculations must involve all three room dimensions. Broadly speaking, three types of standing waves will exist within any space, the most powerful of these being the axial waves. which involve any two parallel surfaces, such as any two opposing walls or the floor and the ceiling. In the diagram, we can see a representation of the fundamental frequency axial waves formed by the walls that form the longest dimension of the room. Of course, in reality, axial waves will also be formed by the opposing shorter walls and between the floor and the ceiling. Within the base region, so below 250 hertz, a total of 22 axial waves or axial nodes that will therefore exist in Tandy's space. Gets more complicated, bear with me. Tangential waves involve any two sets of parallel surfaces. In this case, the tangential waves formed between all four walls or any two walls, the floor and the ceiling. Here we see a representation of the fundamental frequency tangential wave formed by the four walls on the XY axis, the long axis of the room. Tangential waves will also be formed between the walls, floor, and ceiling on the XY and YZ axis. A total of 48 tangential waves below 250 hertz will therefore exist in Tandy's workshop. Still with me? An oblique standing wave is further formed between all six surfaces, the four walls, the floor, and the ceiling, and there are 6 oblique waves below 250 hertz present in Tandy's workshop. Furthermore, the multiple standing waves that existed inside Tandy's workshop would also interact with one another, resulting in a chaotic soundscape with numerous regions of higher and lower sound pressure being present throughout the workshop. And if we could visualize these interacting sound waves, it would appear more like the surface of a stormy sea, with perhaps one or two of the more dominant wave systems imposed upon the general chaos. Fortunately, modern computer programs exist to allow us to calculate these complicated interactions and the resulting frequencies. Tandy never did provide the other workshop dimensions, but in order to illustrate the numerous standing waves that are present, let's assume the workshop to have average proportions. Using the known length of 30 feet, an assumed width of 20 feet, and an assumed height of 10 feet, give us a reasonable basis for our own standing wave calculations. This provides the following information. The table shown only considers those acoustic waves, their frequency and their orientations at frequencies considered to be infrasonic or having very low frequencies of less than 100 hertz. Moreover, we discovered that the lowest frequency, the 18.98 hertz noted by Tandy, provides only 50% of the total acoustic power that was present in the workshop, the other 50% being made up of all of the remaining frequencies. Tandy claimed to have traced the cause of the infrasound within the workshop to a recently installed 1 meter diameter extractor fan. He observed that turning off the fan caused the sword blade to stop vibrating, and the reports of the anomalous experiences also ceased. This certainly indicates that the fan was implicated in the production of infrasound standing waves, but it does not necessarily indicate that the fan itself was the cause of these standing waves. Infrasound is present from many sources, both man-made and natural, and is capable of traveling vast distances and penetrating buildings and structures without any significant attenuations. It is therefore likely and highly probable that the acoustic standing waves within the workshop were actually the result of a complex series of interactions between the extractor fan and some unknown external infrasound source. Tandy himself noted the considerable amount of background noise within the workshop And from my own infrasound measurements at numerous sites throughout the UK, high levels of ambient infrasound from other sources are the norm rather than the exception. Switching off the extractor fan would affect this interaction between the fan and the unknown external source, but would reinforce Tandy's belief that the fan itself was to blame. In trying to assess Tandy's hypothesis, an additional difficulty is encountered. Although no information about the dimensions of the fencing sword is provided, we can assume that as a competition fencer, Tandy was using a blade which conformed to the sport's regulations, its length being between 80 and 90 centimeters. Therefore, the resonant frequency of the blade can be easily calculated using the same formula Tandy used for his room calculations. We end up with the figure of a resonant frequency of the blade between 190 hertz and 214 hertz. Using the room mode calculation program, which I showed earlier, we find that there are 3 standing waves that exist within this frequency range and 16 additional standing waves within the plus or minus 10% margin of error that Tandy suggested. A final problem in assessing Tandy's claim is that only a small proportion of the total available acoustic energy will ever be transmitted to the saw blade. In order to accurately carry out the computations that are required to calculate this actual energy coupling and the amount of energy that's transmitted to the blade requires detailed information about the saw blade and also the workshops, their dimensions, their structure, the materials that were used, the metallurgy of the blade. The graph shown is based upon the previously assumed dimensions of the workshop and shows a representation of the amount of acoustic energy, which is shown in red, that is transmitted to a 90 centimeter blade, which is shown in blue, at different frequency bands. You'll notice that the maximum amount of acoustic energy transfer takes place close to the blade's resonant frequency between the 190 and 215 hertz. The efficiency of the energy transfer between the sound source and the blade falls dramatically as we move away from the blade's resonant frequency range. So, taking all of the above into consideration, there is actually little to suggest that Tandy and Lawrence's hypothesis that the extractor fan was directly producing infrasound and causing the fencing blade to oscillate is correct. There is also little to support his hypothesis that infrasound close to a frequency of 19 hertz is involved in any way in the production of subjective anomalous experiences, or that continued infrasound studies based around a frequency of 19 hertz can be of any particular value to psychical research. So does this therefore mean that all research into the potential causal link between infrasound and paranormal experiences is just a dead duck? On the contrary, the duck, it seems, is very much alive and well. In a number of experiments conducted by myself and other researchers, infrasound has been shown to be a significant factor in the production of subjective anomalous experiences. During an investigation at a former shipyard on Merseyside, it was discovered that large levels of infrasound were present throughout the location, and in particular in an office block which had gained a strong reputation for being haunted. The chief source of this infrasound was eventually traced to be ships within the repair basin running their generators and their engines. Staff working there had reported numerous instances of anomalous experiences, including sensed presence, feelings of being watched, anxiety, and visual apparitions. And here we can quickly see an infrasound trace recording. You can see the red lines falling down the waterfall display. And this actually shows a ship that's sitting in the repair basin. And you can see each infrasound line is actually one of it's possible to actually count the number of cylinders in the diesel engines using the sound traces. So here we can see the ship's in the repair basin. He's running his generators. And here we can see the same plot when when there was no ship present, therefore nothing running its generators. So we see with the generators running, we can clearly see the infrasound just around 5 hertz, 10, and 15 hertz. There's another at 20. They step up in 5 hertz. And then no ship there, no infrasound. The infrasound within the main part of the building, a large empty office, was measured at 2-meter intervals. And unaware of the infrasound measurements, members of an investigation team conducted a routine paranormal investigation, which consisted of them sitting in pairs and documenting their experiences, their thoughts, and their feelings. As part of the infrasound exposure pilot study that was running, the investigators had been positioned in areas already known to be lower, to have low levels of infrasound, whilst others were placed in areas where infrasound levels were much higher or around the middle range. The notes from the investigators, which recorded their experiences, were really quite enlightening. And here we can see from the low to medium areas, reports of I can hear other team members talking quietly. Everything is quiet and I'm feeling tired. A slight headache, had it most of the night. Typical paranormal investigation stuff. And one exceptional one, I don't usually feel as uneasy as this. If we look at the logs from the high, medium to high areas, I have a headache and a pain in my ear. I just don't feel at ease tonight. I don't know why. I'm just waiting for something to happen. I feel anxious and my heart rate does seem to be elevated. Nothing much to report, but feeling cold. I thought I saw someone standing next to me, and I don't know why, but I just don't like it in here. During the same period, a psychic medium was invited to walk around the location independently and mark down anything he considered to be noteworthy. The comparison was interesting, and talking to the medium afterwards, it was he who suggested that perhaps he was interpreting the infrasonic acoustic stimulus in terms of his own beliefs, as he described them as regions of varying psychic energy. Although this was only a pilot study conducted during the early field trials of some newly developed infrasound measuring equipment, the anecdotal reports from the investigation team did indicate that there were clear differences between the reported experiences of those who were exposed to higher levels of infrasound versus those who exposure was to lower levels. Using this information from the shipyard, it also seemed to be the case that staff working in the building were also more likely to report paranormal encounters at times that coincided with ships being present within the repair basin, therefore producing greater levels of infrasound. During the 2007 Mary King's Ghost Fest in Edinburgh, an infrasound generator was used in the largest ever field study of infrasound exposure made to date. The experiment was designed to test the idea that infrasound might be responsible for producing paranormal-like experiences for visitors to the haunted attraction. A powerful infrasound array was installed within the notoriously haunted Chesney's house, which meant that the poor operator, me, had to spend hours alone in that terrifyingly haunted part of the place. The experiment exposed visitors to either the ambient infrasound found within the close or added higher levels of infrasound using a frequency of 18.9 hertz, which was selected to test Candy's hypothesis that this frequency was key in producing increased reports of anomalous experiences. And we were particularly looking for visual effects and resulting apparitions. The addition of infrasound was decided by a random series of dice throws, and visitors were not informed that they were being exposed to additional levels of infrasound at times. In total, more than 400 visitors were surveyed over a week-long series of experiments. The ambient infrasound inside Mary King's Close was measured throughout and found to be significant across a broad range of frequencies, with a peak of around 15 hertz. This was found to be due to the heating and air conditioning equipment of the Edinburgh City Chambers building, which is located directly above Mary King's Close. At the end of the week-long experiment, there was a significant difference between the two exposure groups. In Group A, 249 people experienced both the ambient infrasound and the experimentally produced infrasound. In Group B, 190 people experienced only ambient infrasound. 1/3 of those in Group A and just over 1/3 of those in Group B reported an anomalous experience, which they thought was paranormal. This showed little difference between the two exposure groups. However, when the number of people reporting multiple experiences was looked at, there was a clear difference between the two exposure groups. This was a statistically significant difference. The experiment completely failed to demonstrate any of the visual effects predicted by Tandy's hypothesis, with just one person reporting a visual anomaly and no reports of apparitional experiences being received at any time during the experiment. This experiment strongly suggested that infrasound was responsible for producing some of the experiences that people might associate with being paranormal. The experiment also indicated that infrasound does not affect everyone, with only 1/3 of the sample being affected, regardless of the level or the nature of their infrasound exposure. The infrasound experiment also produced some unexpected results too. On the final night, after the visitors left, it was decided to run the equipment at full output just to see what would happen. During this period, a number of the team and staff from the attraction reported strange and unexpected sensations. The highly peculiar nature of some of these sensations led to the infrasound generator gaining the nickname the Orgasmatron. This peculiar effect and resulting nickname was perhaps not as strange as it might have appeared. In the 1980s, a US naval surgeon observed that many of the young ratings aboard US aircraft carriers would often assemble on the flight deck, ostensibly to witness the launching of jet aircraft. Thinking it strange that so many junior ratings of both sexes were apparently so keen on watching the jets being launched, he decided to ask some of the ratings about their interest. And to his surprise, he discovered that the deep bass roar of the jets was described as being sexually arousing. We completed our full power infrasound experiments with nothing further untoward taking place, and events reported by the BBC the following day, in which an adjacent building that had stood for 200 years suddenly collapsed, categorically had nothing whatsoever to do with our experiment. It was merely a coincidence. But the results from the Ghost Quest experiment confirmed an earlier mass infrasound exposure experiment. During a series of soundless music concerts that I was involved with, around 750 concert goers were played live music, some of which was laced with infrasound. When added to the music, infrasound caused a range of weird effects, even amongst those who were completely unaware of its presence. Strange reactions included a extreme sense of sorrow, coldness, anxiety, and even shivers down the spine. A sound plot taken during the soundless music uh, performance shows that the addition of the infrasound generator by the experimenters, uh, together with the infrasound that we were generating, there was also a significant amount of infrasound present across a broad frequency range. Here we can see the first plot showing the sound frequency with the generator running, and we can see the distinct peak from the generator at 17 hertz. And then we can see what happened when we turned it off again. Um, and it does show the difference. The generator's on and the generator is off. But if you look at the left-hand side of the graph, you can see there is still an awful lot of infrasound from somewhere else in the building. Tandy's hypothesis that infrasound may be responsible for inducing anomalous experiences was tested again in 2009 by the Haunt Project led by Professor Chris French. They used generated infrasound to investigate the possibility of creating an artificially haunted room, specifically to investigate whether exposure to infrasound and complex electromagnetic fields, or both in combination, would lead to an increased reporting of anomalous sensations. The haunted room was basically a circular chamber of canvas, fabric, and wood built inside an empty room, with a pair of electromagnetic coils hidden just outside of the chamber, together with a single infrasound speaker also outside of the chamber. Infrasound was generated by combining two sine waves, one at 18.9 hertz and one at 22.3 hertz. These frequencies were chosen to be representative of infrasound measured by Tandy within the Coventry cellar. Participants each spent 50 minutes in the chamber, recording on a floor plan a brief description of any anomalous sensations they experienced, and also noting their positions within the chamber when these sensations were experienced. The participants were randomly allocated either an infrasound absent or an infrasound present state in combination with the electromagnetic field, which was also absent or present. Many of the participants reported having anomalous sensations. The researchers then reported failing to find any support for a link between the presence of infrasound and the experiences of anomalous sensations, and suggested that the case for infrasound inducing haunt type experiences now appears to be extremely weak. However, many of the reported anomalous sensations described by the participants have previously been strongly linked by researchers studying effects of infrasound exposure. 79.9% of the participants reported feeling dizzy or odd. 49.4% reported they felt as if they were spinning around, and tingling sensations were reported by nearly 33%, and 31.6% described pleasant vibrations throughout their bodies. Other sensations linked to infrasound exposure were also reported, including a sense of presence, 22.8, sadness, 11.4, terror, 8.9, and sexual arousal, 5.1%. Sensations that may be associated to infrasound were additionally reported, such as hearing a ticking sound, which may be due to changes within air pressure caused by the infrasound acting on the eardrums, or some structural component within the chamber. But some of the sensations have no current association with infrasound, such as feeling they were somewhere else, feeling detached from their bodies, or describing odd smells. Unfortunately, the experimenters failed to properly address a number of key issues relating to the measurements and the physics of sound. A serious error was the incorrect assumption that there was no infrasound present when they turned off their generator. Measurements of sound levels were taken and stated to be around 75 decibels when the infrasound equipment was switched on, 65 decibels when the air conditioning was running, and 50 when everything was turned off. So clearly there was 50 decibels of sound energy present, and some of that undoubtedly would have been within the infrasound region. Unfortunately, no information about the range of ambient frequencies that were present was ever provided, and crucially, no information was provided about the sound measuring equipment that was used and what sort of filter weighting was applied to the measurements. And in fact, by using two frequencies, 18.9 and 22.3, the experimenters were inadvertently producing significantly more infrasound than they ever realized. When any two frequencies are mixed together, they produce secondary frequencies known as beat frequencies. One is formed by the addition of two frequencies, so it would have been a barely audible 41.2 hertz. The other, formed by subtracting the two primary frequencies, would have been at a deeply infrasonic 3.4 hertz. It is therefore possible, and indeed highly likely, that significantly higher amplitudes of infrasound were being produced by the experimenters' equipment. The experiment also failed to consider any interactions of infrasound from ambient sources or the speaker, or the walls, or the sounds bouncing off the walls. Although or even as the participants moved around through the chamber. They did note that, in fact, with the electromagnetism, the nature of the field can vary infinitely, and the participants' movements throughout the field will add an extra level of complexity. And this variability and complexity would also have been the case as the participants moved around throughout the varying sound field too. Without crucial additional information, especially about the levels of ambient infrasound or the sound pressure in different parts of the chamber, the argument against the role of infrasound not being a causal factor must be seriously questioned. In fact, when considering the reported anomalous sensations, it would appear that there was actually quite substantial evidence within the data for infrasound playing a significant role in the production of many of the reported experiences. Oh, sorry, jump there. Given the current state of our knowledge of infrasound and its links with subjective paranormal experiences, some possibilities are suggested. These are that around about 1/3 of the population are susceptible to the effects of infrasound, that exposure manifests as a range of physical, physiological, and psychological sensations without any obvious cause. Therefore, with respect to the location, personal belief, expectation, and prior knowledge, infrasound having a broad range of frequencies is likely to result in some individuals interpreting sensations as having a paranormal origin. I'm just going to jump a couple of slides just to get back just grab us a bit of time. I'm going to ask, is it just infrasound that we should actually be interested in? Let's have a look at ultrasound. The domain of the dog whistles and bats is well known for its abilities to disrupt human physiology. Ultrasound is defined as frequencies that lie above the range of human hearing, therefore above 20 kilohertz. As we age, our ability to hear very high frequency sounds becomes significantly degraded. The mosquito device employed by many shopping precincts and malls exploits this age-related deterioration in our hearing using near ultrasonic frequencies to deter loitering teenagers. I'm just going to issue a warning now. If you're listening on headphones, pull them back a little bit or lower the volume, because ultrasound is also used as an acoustic non-lethal weapon. One of the devices being LRAD, the long-range acoustic device, and another smaller brethren of it is employed in riot control in the United States and increasingly in the United Kingdom. Oh, I didn't. There we go. Oh, sorry. No, it's not going to play. Never mind. But we need to find a natural source of this infrasound. Bats, they produce ultrasound. It's highly directional, as with the long-range acoustic device, the non-lethal weapon. So any effects would be highly variable, and linking the potential for ultrasound within a location to bats is difficult to demonstrate. More often, the mere presence of the bats may have a powerful effect on some individuals, simply due to perceived or inherent fear, therefore likely to heighten any experiences or interactions with the ultrasound. As we conclude, let's see if we can push this even further. It's late at night. The computer's obviously giving up on me here. It may actually be the case, and work in the last 2 years in this direction is showing a strong possibility that it may be the case that all sound, infrasound, ultrasound, and sounds that we would normally consider to be within the range of human hearing, but is simply too quiet to be audible, may affect some people. This is actually being used today in video game productions and has been well researched in the music industry, going back 200 years. Its use of inaudible sound waves were well documented within, for example, sacred music. And if the computer plays ball, there you go. If you want to read more about it, there's Paracoustics, Sound and the Paranormal, available in all good Amazons. And if I just stop this, I think I've got some minutes for questions if I'm on time.
Yes, you have. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, anyone got any questions?
That
Yeah.
that sorry,
Lance,
Joyce. That that sound sample that we were going to send that didn't come through. What was the frequency, and were we expected to hear something or just react to?
Well, what you would have heard is it was actually a video of an American riot control sound non-lethal sound device, which effectively is just like a very loud burglar alarm, but has a very narrow beam. So as they sweep it around the crowd, and you can see in the video some people standing a meter or so away from the beam center are unaffected, and as they sweep the beam, people start clutching at their side of their head and running away from it. I had the opportunity just before the series of lockdowns to spend a happy few hours with one of these devices, and they really are quite powerful.
Yes, I've seen videos like that for crowd control used by special forces or whatever, and that
Yeah,
seems
yeah. And they use them now on against pirates in the Arabian Gulf. The ships have some of these emitters down the sides of the ships, which they try and target at the incoming small boats.
Steve, is there anything we can use to neutralize the effects of infrasound?
No. And NASA spent millions of dollars trying. They ended up with a chamber that had 50-foot thick concrete walls, a 50-foot thick concrete base, which was built onto 10 meters of rubber, which was surrounded by springs, and they still couldn't get rid of it. It is it is terrifyingly powerful. It
Quite scary.
there was research done in the early part of the 20th century by a French researcher called Vladimir Gavreau, who thought it may be so powerful you could disable the entire enemy's attacking enemy just with a sound wave. The problem with it is it's completely omnidirectional. And this is why you can demonstrate this at home. You have your high frequency speakers, one either side of the television, and the subwoofer can go anywhere. Behind the sofa, almost in another room, because these low frequency vibrations don't pay much heed to structures. They tend to go through them. And they travel immense distances. Whales, who use infrasonic frequency ranges to communicate, have been demonstrated to communicate ocean to ocean using these frequencies.
Wow.
So you can't get away from it.
Powerful. Yeah, I'm sure the military would have got hold of this technology. Mark, yeah, did you want to share something?
Yeah. Hey, Steve. I was listening to your talk here. I worked for a decade with Douglas Trumbull, the special effects guy, and we had Bruce Thigpen from Eminent Technologies come in and build two giant infrasound woofers for us, and we used those as an audience immersion tool. And we had speakers all around the spherical theater. So yeah, in a spherical theater, you have a focus near the center. So we had all the people in the center, and all the seats were on springs. And so the bottom line was whenever we changed the frequency in the louvers, in the infrasound resonating cavities, we would get a different amount of infrasound. So I told Doug that I didn't believe that would work for immersion. I wanted an F-16 base to fly around and actually give you that real feeling. And he said, we don't need it. And I said, yeah, I think we do. So he said, just try out the infrasound thing. Bruce is done. We're going to try it out. Okay. I went in and he put on a space shuttle launch. Okay. So I'm sitting there with him in the front row. And I noticed that when the shuttle was probably halfway into its flight to orbit, I was screaming like a little girl and didn't even know it. Okay. Because the infrasound affects you viscerally and you don't even realize it because you don't hear it, as you know, as everybody knows. So it was pounding you in your chest, and you really felt, thanks to the springs in the seats that are also resonating with this sound, that you are actually going into orbit. And at the conclusion, I looked at Doug and he says, "What do you think?" And I said, "You win, man. That was the most incredible experience." So infrasound is very interesting, and it does make people feel different things. And the feeling I got viscerally was exactly that, what you were talking about. I felt like it could have been associated with a paranormal experience and could have generated a paranormal experience in certain people.
Well, of course, you were experiencing it at the upper end of the amplitude scales.
Yeah.
But those effects are the paranormal effects are amplified when the infrasound levels are much lower. The brain is recognizing that something's happening to it, but
yeah,
it's not
I'm talking
hearing
like
it.
10 hertz, 3 hertz,
And
7
not the
hertz.
frequency. No, not the frequency, the amplitude.
Okay. Yeah, the amplitude was high.
So if you lower the amplitude to the point where they can't ordinarily perceive it, the body through its, the through the body cavities, the brain knows something's happening to it. It just can't figure out what. And
Yeah.
they are then, if you then add to that, you tell them they're in a haunted building, you add suggestion to expectation to belief. It's infrasound doesn't cause paranormal experiences on its own. It's the enhancer, it's the icing on the cake.
Yeah. Well, as you said, we had two 14-foot by 3-foot square chambers that were generating this infrasound underneath the theater. So it was really an
I think the
incredible.
first, if I remember rightly, I think the first movie it was tried in was a film called Earthquake, where they tried loading the movie theaters with truckloads of subwoofers to try
Yeah,
and
that
enhance
was
quake
that was
effect.
called Sense Around.
Yeah,
Yep,
that's it.
I remember that. I saw the movie. Well,
But
thank you very much, Stephen.
it's endless fun to play with. Particularly as a lot of it is outside of the university, so I don't have the same ethical boundaries.
Okay, what's your knowledge and experience of how infrasound can be used for healing?
Um, I I had a very interesting conversation with a sound therapist a few, 2 or 3 years ago. We intended to follow up on the conversation because some of the bowl devices that were being used by the sound therapist were resonating at frequencies that would, if 2 or 3 bowls were in use, due to this adding and subtraction beat frequency effect, you would have been getting quite close to the infrasound region. And I was intrigued to want to go and do some measurements. Unfortunately, the world changed in 2020, and those experiments, that follow-up has never taken place. But sound, I know sound can have profound effects on us, or sound can trigger memories. I don't know of a single person that doesn't find that their mood changes when listening to particular musical tracks, or music will invoke memories of quite powerful memories of events or significant moments in life. Every couple has their song. There is no doubt that sound is possibly our most important sense, not just in the sense of hearing, but in the way that we feel, the way that it affects our emotions, the way that it evokes memories. It is a powerful, powerful sense. And we don't hear with our ears. We hear with our full bodies. The hum was actually, it was the bit I chopped out because one of the interesting aspects of infrasound is this hum, or the humidruz. It's got a number of titles. It's reported worldwide. In fact, I don't think yet the scientists have actually pinned it down. They've come up with everything from the jet stream to breeding species of fish, mating calls of particular types of fish. I've encountered it on one occasion here in the far west of Wales. About 5 years ago, there was reports of a hum that was very disturbing to a small group of residents. Eventually, with the help of the environmental department, the local oil refinery, it was traced to a newly installed 36-inch diameter gas feeder pipeline that whenever they pumped the gas through it under pressure, the pipe itself was acting like a gigantic organ pipe. And we worked closely with them to actually have the pressures altered to kill the resonance of the pipe. And then eventually dampers were put in as well, and that cured the problem permanently. But this hum, it's one of the things, it pops up fairly often in the newspapers and in the media from Canada, the United States, Australia, all around the globe. This hum is reported, and there are some characteristics. It's often manifests at night. Well, at night, headaches, toothaches, everything. When any external stimulus is reduced, any internal stimulus will often increase. Colds always get worse at night, as do toothaches and headaches. It also seemed to manifest unusually with the older population, who are normally their conventional low frequency hearing deteriorates with age. but infrasonic hearing seems to body cavity hearing, non-acoustic hearing seems to take over and becomes more significant. And there is also a gender difference as well. It's reported more by females than males.
Wow. Oh, well, thank you so much, Steve. That's all we have time for. That was really fascinating. And it's something that I don't think about, but it sounds like it's affecting our lives every
It is.
day.
You know, it's
Oh, wow.
been a wonderful, wonderful thing to study. Before I go, it would be very remiss of me just to say a quick hi to Mara Steenhuisen. She's visited this remote part of the world where I live. She studied at Lampeter University for a while. So hi, Mara, and I'm off to bed.
Oh, wow. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, way past your
First time a speaker's
bedtime.
probably ever said that.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you and good.
thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your talk and would love to know more. And so your books is Ghostology, The Art of the Ghost Hunter, and
Yeah.
Paracoustic Sound and the Paranormal. Yes.
And coming soon, again, following on paracoustics is Paravision.
Oh, yeah.
Which lifts
Wow.
it on all of the visual senses and visual phenomena. That's coming out early next year.